Hey friends, welcome to episode 473 of the My 123 Cents podcast. Joining me this week is Chad Smart. And Chad, you actually had this idea. We were on the phone over the weekend and you brought it up, and I didn't really have a topic this week. And I thought it's perfect because I did want to have some holiday themed shows. And so uh, if you do watch Seinfeld, and I know you don't watch Seinfeld, is that right? Or didn't
I
watch Seinfeld?
do. I do not. The only my uh, I was going to say objection, which isn't the right word, but my when you and I worked together at the TV station,
Yes.
and actually, I think it may have actually kind of predated you coming in. I can't remember exactly, but before the morning show was what it is now at our former employer, we didn't have a lot of commercial airtime that was being sold.
Mhm.
And so every commercial break, because the station ran Seinfeld reruns in the evening, they would always put in a Seinfeld commercial during every single commercial break. So I I think I've probably only seen maybe a handful of actual episodes, but I feel like I've seen every single promo for episode at least 50 times. And so I get my Seinfeld knowledge is through osmosis, not through actually watching the show.
Well, it is my favorite sitcom of all time, and maybe my favorite TV show. I don't know, but
How
uh,
dare you? Mama's family is going to be so upset.
Mama's Family is up there too. But one of the big popular things of Seinfeld was the Festivus episode, which Festivus is actually later in the month, but because of schedules and timing and whatnot, this week worked the best to do a Festivus episode. So we're kind of disguising, as we did in an episode a while back, yelling at clouds. We're kind of disguising it as that. So we're going to vent some wrestling frustrations from the year of 2023 and kind of share some opinions, some thoughts. And I thought this was a great idea, so I can't wait to get into it. But I do want to also, once again, thank everyone who donated to the My 123 Cents action figure drive. As of this recording on Sunday, the 10th of December, we have about 300. Well, we have $300 raised monetarily, and then a handful of toys. So I will be shopping later today or in the next day or two, and distributing those toys once again to Toys for Tots. I'll leave an update on the My 123 Cents Facebook and Instagram pages, so be sure to follow along on those. So, but again, everyone, thank you, Chad. Thank you. You've sent gifts every year, and then of course prizes to give away to folks. Cody, who won the Eddie Guerrero T-shirt and rock ornament a while back, I tried to deliver to him last week, and he was on the beach, so he is back here in Illinois now. So Cody, we will connect very soon. Not Rhodes, but Cody Grammer, a friend of mine from those days at WSIL, who probably has seen a few of those Seinfeld promos himself. So. But yeah, Chad, do you want to get the party started, so to speak, with some grievances? Because the whole premise of Festivus is, we're not going to obviously be able to wrestle each other or fight over the metal pole, but we can do the airing of the grievances. So, do you want to get
Yeah,
us rolling here?
sure. But I was just thinking, I wonder if any independent wrestling promotion has done a Festivus poll on a pole match.
That'd be good.
Uh,
That'd be good.
yeah. Right. Send that off to Vince Russo in case he
Yeah,
ever
there
comes
you go.
back. Um, yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday after I talked to you and proposed the idea that this is going to sound probably a lot like yelling at clouds, and I don't want to go too far into cloud yelling, but I just feel like it's more of um, a sense of where we would like to see wrestling kind of be better, or in the words of Melania, be best next year. So
And also
that
realizing that at you nearly 50 and me at 50, that we are not the target demo for
right.
wrestling.
And
Um,
also, no one is listening to us and going to make changes. So,
do you feel like, though, before we get too far into this, talking about age, has your, I mean, obviously, I know that mine has, but has your fandom changed over the years? I mean, obviously, when we were younger, during the 80s, the heyday, the golden era, if you will, between Jim Crockett Promotions and WWF and AWA, all, there were so many choices and so many options. Um, it just felt like it felt so much different than it is today. And obviously, there's more out there to choose from thanks to the internet. Back in the day, you might be able to get 4 or 5 promotions in your hometown, depending on your cable system. But these days, you can watch from all over the world and all these different companies. But has your fandom changed at all? Do you still get excited about wrestling?
It depends. There are times, like just recently I attended AEW Full Gear, and being there in person, it was exciting. You and I attended WrestleMania this year, and I, I don't know, there was something about that. I mean, it was our 10th WrestleMania, so maybe the luster had wore off, or the fact that it was 2 days, and or the fact that you got kicked out, and I didn't even know if we were going to get in. I don't know. Um, but yeah, WrestleMania didn't seem as big, but I still get excited at times. But I do think that my fandom definitely has waned a little bit, and part of that, like I said, is maybe just kind of having more of a life now,
Yeah,
whereas before when I didn't. But like early in the early 2000s when the DVD market really kind of exploded, and I was buying more independent wrestling DVDs. There was something to look forward to. But now, even with independent wrestling TV or high spots TV, if you want to go, so I know they have different promotions too. I let my subscriptions lapse and cancel because I wasn't watching things as much as I used to. And granted, between what is it, 7 hours of WWE television, 5 hours of AEW, there's a lot, and 2 hours of Impact TNA. And I guess if you really get desperate, there's an hour of Wow, Women of Wrestling that you can find out there, and also NWA. So even without really trying to watch wrestling, there's so much wrestling to watch. Um, and I guess I'll put a point in what I was going to start with and go um, with this aspect too. I don't know how much you follow the independent scene, but I don't feel like there's a lot of independent wrestlers that are must see right now, if that makes sense. Like, it used to be like during the 2000s, when you had CM Punk, Brian Danielson, Nigel McGuinness, Samoa Joe, y'all on the independent scene, those were guys that you wanted to watch. And now I I can't think of anybody that would make me want to buy a DVD or watch a show just to see that person perform.
Hmm. Are companies, because you brought up DVDs and it
Mhm.
reminded me that I think it was announced this past week that WWE is going to cease production of
Mhm.
DVDs and Blu-rays. Uh, are the other independent companies still doing that? I know that were buying a lot of that back in the day, but
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, ever since Chikara shut down, I haven't really looked at the Smart Mark Video
mhm,
website to know what they're doing. And I think they do a lot of the productions with independent wrestling TV, so that I guess they've shifted over to the live production instead of DVD. But yeah, I don't know how many. I know PWG here in California, they still put out DVDs like 6 months after the fact of the show. So that's another thing, is timeliness of
yeah,
shows. But yeah, unfortunately the physical market seems to be dying,
yeah.
because I know Best Buy also announced, they're going to stop selling DVDs and Blu-rays in store um,
Mm.
next year.
Oh wow. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just a sign of the times. We're seeing the changes and more people going, paperless or itemless or however you want to label that. But it is an interesting trend, and I guess I don't know if I was more surprised that they're going to stop making DVDs, or if I was more surprised that they are actually still making DVDs
Mhm.
in WWE, because I hadn't seen like any kind of promotion for anything in a long time in that realm. So 'cause
Yeah.
I remember back in the day, paper, well, when we were kids, we didn't get the pay-per-view every time it rolled around. So we would have to wait sometimes for that Coliseum home video to come out
Yeah.
at the video store and go and rent the video cassette. Even back then, it was before they were selling them. But, after we go to WrestleMania or whatever, they
Mhm.
would release a DVD of it and yada, yada, yada. But it is an interesting thing to think about. And sometimes, I see a handful of people that are still clamoring for that physical copy of a movie or whatever. But
Mhm.
it seems like that's all going, not just WWE side of things, but the entertainment industry is kind of following suit.
Yeah, and to segue into that, mean, I think a lot of people are kind of, especially collectors or cinephiles, are um, realizing that the streaming paradise that they thought it would be is not so much. That movies are not available when you want to watch them, or they'll be there for a month and then disappear. And so, actually having the physical media is the way to go if you want it. So I know a lot of collectors are still buying because they want to have it on hand, or if something happens and the film gets edited or um, put into a vault due to circumstances beyond control. I don't know, but yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I think they said that Survivor Series will be the last WWE DVD produced, and I used to collect the big four. I didn't collect all the pay-per-views, but the big four. But I think WrestleMania 30 may have been the last Blu-ray that I bought.
Mm,
So, because then the network launched, and
right.
like, why do I need to have the DVD? I can just go here, and it is easier to hit the play button on a TV than to switch over to a DVD player and put the DVD in. And yeah,
Well, that being said, what I think I kind of interrupted your flow
uh,
there. So continue on with your original thought.
my original thought, and this is probably the big one, but I'm going to start with it instead of saving it for the end, and that is just, I mean, you and I have talked about it many times. The tribalness of, not the tribal chief, but the tribal mentality of wrestling fans and the negativity of wrestling fans on social media, which I get it. The whole purpose of social media is to be negative and complain about everything. That's why it was created. That's why it will stick around. But this whole, it seems like in the last year or so, the WWE versus AEW mindset has just been ramped up because WWE has had a hit with the tribal chief and the bloodline storyline, which personally I think has gotten a little stale, and they need to do something to freshen it up if they're going to keep it around. I don't know how you stretch out Roman Reigns being champion through WrestleMania, except for the fact that he only shows up once every 3 months. Um, but that, and then AEW, AEW's been around for 4 years, and not every company is going to have peaks the entire time. You're going to have valleys. And I think right now, AEW is kind of going through some learning curves or some growing pains. But, if you go online, it's just all doom and gloom. And there are many reasons for that. I think one, AEW runs the same cities too often, too close together, and ticket prices, we're the way the economy is right now, sensible people, and I say sensible because I am not one of them, um, they're not going to be paying $200-300 a ticket every 2 months, 3 months to see a show. And so, yeah, the attendance for AEW is down. I'm sure there are several reasons why, but the whole doom and gloom aspect of the online community of, AEW is going out of business, and they lost CM Punk and Jade Cargill, and I'm like, that every wrestling promotion has lost wrestlers. I mean, look at how many WWE lost to AEW when it started up.
Mhm.
But so I think I wish in the next year or so that there can be a more positive spin on things, and not lying or you know making it sound better than it is, but just focus. Also, unless you have a dog in the fight, why do people care how many people show up for a show? Unless you're making money off of the attendance, what effect does it have on you?
And I agree with you on the tribalism part and whatnot. I will counterpoint you with, from my perspective of watching via social media,
Mhm.
part of the tribalism, not all of it, because I can't blame it all, but I think that Tony Khan comes off to most fans
Mhm.
as kind of, I mean, for lack, I guess this is the airing of the grievances. So he comes off as a mark, and
Mhm.
not Mark is. I think sometimes people use Mark in a derogatory way. Some people use it as a way to describe us all. I think he comes off as a mark in the negative sense of the word, where
Mhm.
it's everything that his company does is great, which obviously, yes, you would expect someone to promote themselves. But I just look at the way, and maybe it's a generational thing.
Mhm.
Vince McMahon, when he had his Twitter account going, I'm not so sure he was even the one posting those tweets, but it was never like this braggadocio. You know what I mean? Like it was with Tony Khan, it's always, like the whole thing with the comment he made after the NXT thing with John Cena
Mhm.
and Undertaker not reaching 1 million views or what. It's stupid petty little stuff like that
Yeah.
that to me feeds that fight. Whereas I think if he would just go on and tweet and say, "Hey, Brian Danielson is here this week and he's going to get in the ring,"
Mhm.
and not tell us every Thursday or Friday that I've got a big announcement coming up next Wednesday. I think that was kind of that Dixie Carter syndrome where you and I back in those days
Mhm.
would talk about that all the time. So
Yeah.
I think part of the tribalism comes from the players, but you're right. As fans, just enjoy what you enjoy. And AEW, I think, is in a unique situation where TNA, when the Jarrett started it, I've listened to Jeff Jarrett's podcast. It's very interesting. I like listening to those episodes where he talks about the TNA Impact early days because I remember watching those pay-per-views at your house in 2004 and just kind of, the Jarretts never had that money
Mhm.
to make it to where AEW is. And so as fans, we should be happy that there are alternatives because when someone does get released from WWE, now they can go to AEW and continue to make a comparable, if not more, when they were in the WWE. So I never ever want to see AEW or TNA or NWA or Ring of Honor go out of business. Uh, but I do, you and I do banter back and forth on Instagram or on usually on Snapchat. But I definitely feel like AEW has been a benefit for the wrestling industry. And again, we talked about it a couple weeks ago on the CM Punk episode that we did on Music Mania. Would Punk's moment have been as exciting a couple of weeks ago at Survivor Series had he not been to AEW first? And
Mhm.
I would argue no, it wouldn't have been because at least AEW gave him a platform for a year and a half or 2 years. So I think that as fans, we need to chill and not be so like ready to pounce when the other side has a stumble along the way.
Yeah. And I agree with you about Tony Khan. And you and I have joked about it, that if it comes Tuesday and Tony hasn't announced that he has a huge announcement,
Yeah.
like, can someone check on Tony to make sure he's okay? Like, like, but and and I mean, I will say, yes, Vince McMahon didn't do that on Twitter, but I think Vince McMahon did that on TV. And part of it may have been the Mr. McMahon character being braggadocious. I mean, what other
Oh, yeah.
wrestling promoter has, took on God and
Right.
claimed,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think Tony needs to, and I agree. I think Tony is, in a sense, maybe a money mark who I think a lot of fans would be the same way though if they had that money. And I think,
Oh, sure.
I don't know what he does with the Jaguars from the NFL
Hmm.
as far as their day to day and operation, but I think yes, the AEW hierarchy of business should be more of his concern than scoring retweets and likes. But you brought up a point, or in your talking, I thought of something, and that is, um, I won't go political to tell you why. I'll explain off air why I think this way. But um, you know, WCW and ECW went out of business in 2001. And it wasn't really, I mean, TNA and Ring of Honor started in 2002, but they were never really serious competition for WWE. You didn't have competition until 2019 when AEW launched. So you have a whole generation, 2 generations maybe, of wrestling fans who didn't grow up with competition. Like you mentioned earlier, we had NWA, Jim Crockett, WWF, AWA, UWF, WCCW. I'm just going to keep naming off the alphabet. But so for us, the older fans who grew up with these different territories that were all kind of on the same level,
Yeah.
so to for argument's sake, I wonder if the fact that these newer fans don't have that experience, if that's where part of the tribalism comes from, where they're not used to. So they're like, I've been a WWE fan for X amount of years. That's what I'm dedicated to. Or, I don't really like WWE, but I like AEW. And so I have to put all my focus on AEW.
It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah. If anybody under the age of 60 is listening to this show, please let us know. Um, yeah, so that's my thought. Do you have you want to do your next?
I didn't make a list per se, but
Okay.
the tribalism is definitely the biggest thing. I just feel like, when it comes to independent wrestling,
Mhm.
I had a handful of years of experience working on the indies, and this year, 2023, kind of stepped away from Stride and from doing that. And in the wake of that, kind of seeing new companies emerge and pop up. And well, I think that, I mentioned earlier, it's great for the wrestling business to have other places to go. Uh, I think on the independent scene, on the local level, that sometimes almost gets a little too much. This area is not huge in terms of wrestling fandom, you know,
Mhm.
and now there are companies that are, in some months you will see probably 3 or 4 different companies running shows every week, and you can look at the pictures and the videos and see that the crowds are not, robust and
Mhm.
whatnot. And I'm not saying that there should only be one company or whatever, but I feel like, and it's a lot of the same guys and women on these cards that are going from show to show, but it's like I just don't feel like the appetite is necessarily there, um, or there's nothing that's making it different or stand out or whatever. So I guess I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this,
Mhm.
other than that, I guess it's good that there are options. Back when you were still living here, we didn't have a whole lot of
Yeah.
independent wrestling, and now to me it almost feels like there's a little too much of it. But uh, again, who am I to spoil someone's fun? And if these guys are getting out there and doing it, I just worry about the sustainability of it. Getting it started, and then does it all drop off and come to an end? And because I do like the idea that guys have a place to wrestle at home, and they're not on the road and they don't have to travel very far. But on the other hand, maybe 4 or 5 shows a month for this area to support.
Mhm.
It's just kind of a big ask, I think. So because there's not more than probably 20 or 30 miles between these areas, so the fans will travel, I think. But we've seen that time and time again with Stride. Fans coming from you know the St. Louis area from time to time, and different parts of this region. But again, eh, I guess to each his own, and we'll see how things pan out. I wish none of these companies anything but the best. I wish all of these companies nothing but the best. I am trying to say, but so I know where you live. There's probably a lot of independent wrestling as well. But you're in the second largest city in the
Mhm.
country, so
Yeah, and there are a lot of shows, and probably more than I'm aware of because my social media following is limited to just a few local wrestlers, and so they'll promote whatever shows they're on. But I think the biggest problem out here, and I guess, even in Southern Illinois too, and probably other places, is one, the shows have varying degrees of talent. So, someone will have guys that are just starting out. I should say guys and females, wrestlers, we'll just say wrestlers that are just starting out, that are getting the reps in to become better. And then some that have the name talent that are flown in from across the country. And, the problem is the the shows that you don't know the people. I think there's a problem, unless you're like a diehard wrestling fan and you go to it. I think wrestling fans want to see people they know. So those smaller shows probably don't get the attendance that they should because of, the lack of known availability or known quantities, but also the price tag for tickets, is there. And then the name brand. I
Yeah.
told you, I like when I moved out here, um, I would go to PWG shows once a month or every other month, and I think it was like $20 to $30, and now it's like $100 if you want to sit ringside, and $60 just for general admission. I'm like, and granted, PWG has had some personal issues behind the scenes this year, so they haven't run as many shows. But when they were doing shows once a month, like that sustainability isn't there for the average person. So I think, unfortunately, with wrestling, that's one of the biggest issues is cost. Is, how much does it cost to get into a show, and then especially on the indie circuit, because wrestlers are selling merchandise. They're selling, it's, do you want the picture? Do you want the T-shirt? Do you want this? It's so I'm with you that I mean, I think any company that wants to make a go, and if they can do it, more power to them. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see over the next few years how much, if these companies stick around, how often they run. When you were here in March, we went to Wrestling Pro Wrestling, and I think they've also had some issues behind the scenes. They have not ran a show since that show, and they just announced their next show is in February.
Wow. I didn't realize.
So
I wondered. I did see that they're running a show in February. I didn't realize
yeah,
the one that we went to was the last one.
yeah, and I think it had something to do with the building they were running in, and whether or not it was available or whatnot. So, because I think their next show is in a new location. So, um, but yeah, you have that aspect of it. So, uh, yeah, and it's like, I mean, I guess it's kind of like films these days too. There are so many films that get released and thrown onto it, the streaming platform, that no one's watching everything. So, but I don't know. Is too much entertainment a bad thing, or is it just the future of entertainment?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's kind of the future of of entertainment, because when we were growing up, and again, I hate referring back to when we were kids and sounding like that, but in St. Louis, where I lived, we had the three main channels, and then
Mm.
an independent channel, KPLR, which aired a lot of the wrestling stuff, and then a PBS station. So, and this was before Fox was a thing. So we really had five channels to choose from before the days of cable. And so
Mhm.
you were watching everything. You did see everything that was coming through. But now with all the streaming and different versions, and between podcasts and watching YouTube videos or watching TikTok or whatever it is that however you're consuming your entertainment and information varies. So uh, I would assume that the men and women who do participate in wrestling, pro wrestling, for example, even though March might have been their last show under that banner, I'm sure many of them were wrestling and doing things at
Yeah,
other, because I think most of their performers are pretty local as well to that area. Is
mhm.
that right?
I believe so. Yeah, and I know, like I said, the couple that I follow, I know have done other shows and work for other companies, but then it's the difference between wrestling, pro wrestling, and another wrestling promotion. It's a different, it's like Chikara and Ring of Honor. Like, guys may have worked both shows, but they're not the same
Yeah.
style of show.
Right.
So, um, I'm going to segue, and silly kids. Segues are for kids. Silly rabbit. Segue are for kids. I don't know what I'm saying here. Anyway, what am I issues, and again, you and I talk about this a lot off camera, off air, but I would like to see WWE change up their booking format. And I think a lot of the, like I've said, I don't watch Raw or SmackDown on a weekly basis. One, as we discussed earlier, there's so much wrestling available. I can't do it. But also, it's like, um, I have a cousin who just got into wrestling again after like 20 years, and he got into AEW, um, and that's what his main focus is. And we've talked about WWE, and he's like, yeah, I watch the premium live events, which I don't know if PLE will ever sound as
Right.
at like pay per view or PPV, um, but he's like, I can't watch the show because it's the same show week after week. And we joke about, okay, who's going to open up Raw this week? Is it going to be Judgment Day or is it going to be Cody Rhodes?
Mhm.
Who's going to open up SmackDown? Is it going to be the Bloodline or whoever the Bloodline's feuding with? It's they have so many talent, so much talent there, and AEW is the same way. I think they do a better job until the last month when they started this Continental Classic tournament where the same guys are wrestling this. I think what is it, 6 guys in each bracket, and the same 6 wrestle every week on Dynamite, and the same 6 wrestle on Collision because it's a round robin tournament. Um, but other than that, but I think WWE just seems like the weekly television isn't really meaningful, and so I would like to see some change in that regard. And I don't know how much you pay attention or.
Um, I I see a lot of the I'm watching via social media, and while
Hmm.
I do watch the PLEs, and you're right, it does not have as PPV, but no, I see what you're saying, and I understand uh, from that perspective, and it does feel like back even during the Monday Night War, we got into that formulaic kind of way of doing Raw,
Yeah.
and I don't think it even under now the Triple H administration, if you will, I don't necessarily feel like it has changed much in that regard. I feel like the creative has gotten better. The talent definitely is better. I don't feel like with WWE as much as it used to be. It's not as cartoony, I guess. You don't have to necessarily suspend your belief. So I feel like that's some good things about it, but yeah, I do think that it does become kind of stale and mundane. But and the other thing is, from what I've noticed, sometimes too, especially with AEW, I feel like um, whenever there seems to be a little bit of a controversy or something negative surrounding one of their talent, that overshadows whatever successes they seem to have. And that kind of is going back to the whole wrestling tribalism thing. But just watching on social media, to me, it feels like the Sting retirement storyline is more revolved around Ric Flair right now than it is around Sting. And that may just be the perspective or the perception of seeing it on social media. But
Hmm.
here, I can't believe Ric Flair said this, or I can't believe Ric Flair did that, and whatever, whatever, whatever.
Well, and I think, real quick, I think that goes back to what I was saying about fans that weren't grown up during, or weren't fans during the heyday of WCW, because Ric Flair is Ric Flair, and good or bad, whatever you want to think,
Yeah,
he's been this way for 40 years.
right.
It's just things that he said allegedly that were cut out of a recent promo, or things he said back on WCW Saturday Night. Again, different time. It was allowed. But um, I don't know. I disagree with you in that regard. I mean, I think Flair has been a focus, but I don't think. I'm curious how they're going to draw out the Sting retirement tour for the next 4 months, because I've joked with you about the All In promotion, which is their next Wembley show in August. Like,
Mhm.
if they promote that on every single show for the next 8 months, that's just going to be overkill. But Sting, yeah, unless they, and even just having Sting come out and cut promos to be like, hey, thanks. city for the memories, and I did this in this city, and that's going to get stale as well too. I think they hopefully have a plan in place. I'm not going to count on it, but yeah, I do think that they do need to not run into the for of doing the same thing over and over with Sting in each stop. And if you're going to do that, do it off camera. Just do it for the fans in attendance.
Well, and let me clarify. When I said that it felt like Ric Flair is overshadowing,
Mm.
I didn't mean from AEW's perspective. I mean from the
Uh,
fan, like what
oh,
I'm seeing on social media as a result of the Flair promo that got
mm,
apparently, and I don't know what was said or whatever. I was trying to kind of figure that out, but that's what I meant. I didn't necessarily mean that AEW is overdoing it with Flair
mm,
thing, but
yeah. And I think what Flair said, if I remember correctly, is something about like inviting a bunch of women back to his hotel room to party.
18 to 28, no husbands or
Yeah.
boyfriends, very
Yeah.
hot. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
Hopefully some are EMTs so they can.
right. No kidding. No kidding. So yeah, that
Mm,
was my kind of thing with
mm,
Sting and Ric Flair. So, but yeah, I mean, I and speaking of Sting, I did more of a dive into his career last
mm,
week, but I do feel like um, it's going to be interesting to see, and I don't know if he's a part of every week's show or not, or all three shows. I know they
mm.
do. Like you said, they're doing 5 hours of wrestling each week as well, and um, I think part of what made Sting fun and interesting and unique in this last run was that he was kind of an attraction. He wasn't there all the time, and so
Okay.
these last 4 months, like you said, if they do that, it may turn some fans off. But I don't know.
Mm. I know. And I know, some of the complaints that I've seen online too have been that Sting is undefeated in AEW, but
Hmm.
he's been used in a lot of multi-man matches, tag matches, six-man tags, and they've kept him away from the title scene. It's not
Right.
like even the tag titles, they never have challenged. So he is used more as the attraction spot, which is where obviously a 63-year-old man, if he's going to be in the ring, should be. He should not be champion. And I hope they don't decide to give him like a token title run just to say that he was champion. But I am curious to see who they will choose for his final opponent or who he chooses. Part of me thinks it will be Darby Allin just as a completing the passing of the torch. But um, I would also like to see it be Ric Flair and Flair turn on him one last time because I'm a sadist.
Well, I figure it's Flair is going to turn on him, and I didn't know if it would be Darby Allin with Ric
Mm.
Flair at his corner then against Sting, but it's going to be interesting to see. I do it's keeping people on their toes and curious about what's going to happen. So, but you've got to inevitably think that Flair is going to turn on him at some point, or maybe Sting turns on Flair. I don't know.
Flair. Uh, so
We have to-
maybe they can, if they could just get a YouTube show together and do that, that'll be fine. But really, the only other thing that I was going to point out in my grievances is kind of going off of what I was saying about WWE being formulatic and repetitive. AEW also needs to. I would like to see them figure out new booking for their TV, new timing sheets, basically for their TV show, because it seems like every single match has a commercial break. They all. If I would have had more time, I wanted to look up how long each match over the last like 6 months on Dynamite and Collision ran, because I think they're all about the same amount of time, and not every match needs to have a commercial break. And there's a difference between a a 15-minute match and a 30-second squash. Like there's in between time in there that you can better book. But and I don't know if that's just Tony has his one timing sheet and he just crosses out the names and puts in whoever's wrestling that week. But it does make the show seem very predictable.
Yeah, I would say if we were gifting people in wrestling gifts this holiday season, I would give Tony Khan with some support staff that he can actually
Mm.
rely on and count on. I am sure they are there and giving him that permission, if you will, to let
Mm.
other people step up. I know Vince McMahon back in the day was the final call, but he also surrounded himself with Bruce Pritchard and Pat Patterson and Jim Ross, and there were other people there that were hiring the talent or making booking the house shows and helping with the pay-per-views, and I don't think Tony Khan has that support, and I don't know if he's just not let it happen or what it is, but I think that for the sake of his health and longevity, you know, I can't imagine going at this pace for the next 40 years like Vince McMahon had done. So it would definitely benefit him, and I think the product if he were maybe not as hands on in
Mm.
every aspect of it. And again, you can still have that oversight, but
Yeah.
not that constant hand in the cookie jar, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think the biggest area where that is could be seen is separation of AEW and Ring of Honor,
Yeah.
and maybe hires people to oversee Ring of Honor, and you just kind of okay storylines or matches, and but you not it's not TK's focus. He should be focused on AEW.
What you mentioned earlier too. You talked about something about social media or YouTube shows, Sting
Mhm.
and Blair starting a YouTube show. What are your thoughts on stories that are developed or grown on social media like YouTube? I know that for a while there was a lot of stuff going on with the Young Bucks and being the elite. Um, that maybe if you weren't watching that, you weren't getting some of the references that were being made on television. WWE has dabbled with that as far as like talking about a quote unquote Twitter war between two
Mhm.
superstars. But if you weren't following along, you weren't and social media is so evolving and fast paced and
Yeah.
changing. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss out. So what do you feel about companies that do utilize social media outside of the normal television box, if you will?
I think it it can be done well, and also, as you said, it can also be a way to somewhat alienate your audience because um, it is a new way to start feuds or start storylines. But yeah, you have to figure out how you're going to showcase that on your program. You can't just have it be on a Twitter feud or a YouTube clip, and then at your next show have the match and be like, "Hey, these people are fighting now." It's like you have to tell the audience why they're there, and the problem is not all your audience is on social media, or they're not following along to all your shows. And I would be curious to know how much, what percentage of wrestling fans do follow the, like, I know WWE has the bump that they do on either YouTube or Peacock. And like you said, AEW did have being the elite, which from the times that I watched it, never really had anything of real note that carried over to the show, but it did give you maybe an aspect into different wrestlers that weren't focused on AEW programming. I know like um, Ryan Nemeth would show up a lot on Being the Elite, and um, I don't think I can't tell you when he was on AEW television last. I think he does more Ring of Honor, but
Oh,
and the Dark Order kind of got their characters over on Being the Elite, and that hasn't translated over into AEW because they're not used. Um, I mean, they're basically jobbers to the stars, and and that's one of the things I do. One change in AEW over the last year or so is the they used to focus on the wins and losses,
uh,
and they'd be like, "Oh, this team's on a 15 match winning streak, so that's why they're getting a tag team title shot." And it's like that team has not been on AEW television in 8 months. They all their wins have come on the YouTube Dark or Elevation against jobber teams. So now you're telling me that this team is going to beat your tag team champions? Like, I think that was a corner they kind of backed themselves into when they first had launched and said that wins and losses were going to matter and they're going to treat it like legitimate sports. But,
Do they still
but
get
yeah,
still as focused on that?
they mention it, but then it's not as it's not why someone would get a title shot. Now title shots are more storyline driven, um, but because they don't have the YouTube shows anymore since they started Ring of Honor and Collision. Um, so yeah, I think, but I do definitely think that they need to focus more on a good separation of talent of, who's going to be on the Ring of Honor roster, who's going to be on AEW. Keep them separate, keep the titles
Yeah.
to the respective brands. Don't put ROH titles on AEW wrestlers and the like. So, um, but again, and I think, part of that just comes from Ring of Honor not really having television. They just have on the web show on the Ring of Honor website. So maybe that will change next year. Also, it would be nice if AEW could get added to the Max platform and not have to buy pay-per-views and they can become PLEs and whatnot. But that would be nice for my wallet.
Well, and one last thing that I came to my mind as you were talking there is something I would change in wrestling, and it kind of goes back to that tribalism, but also that expectation of fans. And that is when something doesn't go the way that we thought it was going to go,
Mm,
then it becomes a horrible idea.
yeah.
You were talking about AEW a minute ago, and to me, the devil storyline, uh, based on the rumors that I've heard, versus who people are hoping or wanting. And at one point, Punk's name was in that
Yeah.
mix, which obviously that's not going to happen. So now it feels like if it's anybody less than Punk, there's going to be this disappointment and this outrage amongst fans. So I think that fans need to temper their expectations and not be so, expecting of one thing, and then when that doesn't happen, instead of waiting to see how that story is going to play, it's
Yeah.
immediate criticism. So
Yeah. You fantasy book your own scenario. And then when that doesn't happen, it's a terrible
yeah,
decision because it's not the one you came up with. And yeah, I'm curious to see how they're going to play off the devil. I mean, logically, I can only think of one person that it should be based on storyline. So I will be curious to see if it's not that person, how they explain it. I'm also, again, going back to the sadist in me. I want it to be Shane McMahon and or even Vince. Maybe that's why Vince sold all of his stock in WWE. Um, or Ole Anderson. I mean, and
there you
then you could tie Ric Flair into it. But as long as the devil isn't doing magic tricks, then I guess we're okay.
absolutely. Anything else, Chad, you want to add to this week's Festivus episode?
Um, I'm just glad that this wasn't as cloud yelling as I was
Oh,
thinking it was going to be. But I'm curious. Fans listening, like what their thoughts are, and what they would like to see change or the companies do. And uh, I just I'm hoping I can convince you, since you said you're done with WrestleManias. We're not going to WrestleMania 40 to see CM Punk finish Cody's story. Uh, but hopefully I can drag you to Greensboro, North Carolina to see Sting's final match
we'll see. We'll see.
and to show you how awesome AEW is live. And you can take your I Heart Aubrey sign.
Yeah, we didn't mention her. We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. All righty, Chad. Well, thank
Uh,
you for being a part of this week's episode. Thank you
mm,
for your support through the years, obviously, as well. Friends, I want to thank you for checking out this week's episode. Happy Festivus to you a couple of weeks early, and let us know what's on your mind. Have a great week, and we will talk again soon.